There had always been tension buried beneath the polished surfaces of Forrester Creations, a subtle undercurrent of rivalry that threaded through every design meeting, every boardroom discussion, every runway preparation. The fashion house was built on legacy, vision, artistry, and ego. And in a place where creativity collided with ambition daily, it was no surprise that two of its fiercest women were slowly being pushed toward their breaking point. Steffi Forrester and Hope Logan had clashed many times before, but those arguments were nothing more than sparks compared to the firestorm that was now beginning to form. Because this time, the disagreement wasn't personal. It was structural. It was professional. It was about the very identity of a brand they had both poured their lives into. And there was no way the conflict could remain civil for long. The moment Hope heard that Thomas Forrester wanted to rejoin Hope for the future, the color drained from her face so subtly that only a few people noticed. But Steffi was one of them. She saw the stiffness in Hope's shoulders, the tightness around her jaw, the way her hands curled slightly at her sides. Hope had spent the last several years trying to redefine what the brand stood for, carving out a path that was ethical, inclusive, forward-thinking. And she had poured her heart into proving she could stand on her own, without Thomas, without emotional entanglements, without relying on the same fractured cycle of inspiration and obsession that had nearly destroyed both of them. Hope knew the whispers were already circulating through the hallways. Designers speculating whether she could maintain her momentum without Thomas's talent. Assistants gossiping about the possibility of a reunion, professional or otherwise. Even the interns sensed a shift in the air, sensing a storyline beginning to form. And Hope hated it. She hated that her achievements were being overshadowed by the idea of Thomas's return. She hated that people doubted her. But most of all, she hated that part of her, deep inside, quiet but present, still connected Thomas to the golden years of hope for the future, the years when their synergy had created collections that were celebrated worldwide. But Hope couldn't allow nostalgia to distort reality. She remembered too vividly the darker days of Thomas's obsession, the manipulation, the emotional confusion, the pressure he'd put on her. His reinvention was admirable, yes. His recovery was worth celebrating. But that didn't erase the deep-rooted fear that if she let him back in, professionally or emotionally, she would lose not just control of her brand, but control of herself. Steffi, however, saw Thomas through a different lens. She had watched him claw his way back from the edge more times than she cared to remember, each time emerging stronger, clearer, more determined. She saw his transformation not as a temporary shift, but as a genuine evolution. And she saw Hope's resistance as emotional, not professional. To Steffi, this wasn't about the brand. It was about feelings Hope didn't want to admit. And Steffi refused to let Hope's personal hesitation stand in the way of what was best for the company. When the proposal was first discussed in the executive boardroom, the atmosphere was tense from the moment Hope stepped inside. She took her usual seat, back straight, posture elegant, but the stiffness in her movements betrayed the storm brewing inside her. Steffi sat across from her, her expression composed but unyielding, her hands folded calmly on the table. Thomas sat beside his sister, visibly trying to appear neutral even though every muscle in his body revealed how desperately he wanted this opportunity. Even Ridge, who had weathered countless artistic battles, sensed a confrontation was inevitable. Hope tried to keep her voice steady as she outlined her concerns. She acknowledged Thomas's talent, his contribution to the brand, his undeniable artistic vision. But she raised questions about stability, consistency, and the emotional complexities that inevitably arose when personal history was intertwined with professional collaboration. She spoke about direction, about identity, about growth. She insisted that hope for the future had evolved into something new, something that needed fresh voices, fresh perspectives, not a return to a dynamic that had previously imploded. Steffi listened, but her expression hardened with every word. As soon as Hope finished, Steffi responded with a precision that felt surgical. She reminded the room of Thomas's redemption, his dedication, his work ethic, his proven success. She pointed to declining sales figures in the most recent quarter and argued that the brand needed a spark, one Thomas could undeniably provide. She accused Hope, gently but unmistakably, of letting unresolved feelings cloud her judgment. And that was when Hope's composure began to fracture. Because Steffi wasn't wrong. Not entirely. Hope did have unresolved feelings. But they weren't romantic. They were protective. They were rooted in trauma. They were rooted in the fear that Thomas's presence might trigger old patterns she had fought desperately to escape. But Hope couldn't say any of that out loud. Not in a boardroom. Not with designers watching. Not with Ridge and Steffi flanking Thomas, like guards defending a crown prince. So instead, Hope held her ground through logic. She emphasized her leadership role, her success, her vision. She insisted that the brand belonged to her. And when she said that word, belonged, Steffi's eyebrows lifted just slightly, as though Hope had revealed more than she intended. Because to Steffi, nothing at Forrester Creations belonged to any single person. Everything was shared. Everything was collective. Everything was built on a foundation of Forrester blood, Forrester values, Forrester legacy. And Steffi, as co-CEO, believed fiercely in protecting that legacy, even if it meant challenging Hope. When the meeting adjourned without resolution, everyone left with their nerves frayed. Thomas walked out quietly, guilt shadowing his expression. Ridge followed with the weary frustration of a man caught between two powerful forces. But Steffi and Hope remained in the room, facing one another with the unspoken realization that this battle had only just begun. For the next several days, the tension seeped into every corner of the building. Designers held their breath when Steffi and Hope walked past each other. Assistants whispered about the impending showdown. Even the interns avoided the drafting rooms whenever both women were inside, fearing sparks might fly, literally. Hope buried herself in work, reviewing fabrics, restructuring marketing plans, overseeing fittings. But she felt Steffi's presence everywhere, questioning, observing, challenging. Steffi wasn't subtle. She asked pointed questions about progress. She requested updates on designs. She suggested revisions. She made comments about how the lines seemed to be missing something. And every time she said it, workroom chatter quieted as people watched Hope's face tighten with restrained irritation. Hope had never minded criticism. She welcomed feedback. But Steffi's remarks weren't critiques. They were provocations. And, eventually, one of those provocations tipped the balance. It happened during a model fitting when Hope was adjusting the drape of a dress and Steffi stepped in to observe. The dress was modern, elegant, clean, and Hope felt proud of the way it embodied the new direction she envisioned. But Steffi stood with her arms crossed, surveying the garment the way a queen might survey a battlefield. "It's good," Steffi said. But Thomas would have elevated it. Hope froze. The model looked at the floor. The seamstress stiffened. And for a moment, the entire room felt suspended in silence. Hope turned slowly. Her voice, when she spoke, trembled just slightly. "Steffi, this collection reflects the brand as it is now, not as it was when Thomas worked on it." Steffi raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe that's the problem." Hope inhaled sharply, her cheeks warming with anger. She set down her pins carefully, controlling the tremor in her hand. "The problem," Hope said, keeping her voice calm, "is that you're assuming Thomas's return is the only way to move forward." "I'm not assuming," Steffi replied. "I'm recognizing reality. The numbers don't lie, Hope. You're struggling. And Thomas brings success. Why are you so threatened by that?" Hope's eyes flashed, not with fear but with the pain of being misunderstood. "I'm not threatened. I'm protecting the integrity of the brand." "Or your ego," Steffi said quietly. The room fell completely silent. Hope felt something inside her snap, not violently, but with a quiet finality. She stepped closer to Steffi, lowering her voice so the others wouldn't hear. "You're not doing this for the brand. You're doing it because he's your brother. And because you don't trust me." Steffi didn't retreat. She didn't apologize. She simply held Hope's gaze with calm, steady confidence. "I trust results." Hope's breath caught in her throat, not because Steffi was cruel, but because she spoke with an unshakable certainty Hope couldn't refute. Hope had built her career on kindness, collaboration, empathy. And now she stood against a woman who wielded power like armor and was willing to use it. Hope stepped back, feeling a fire ignite inside her, a fire she didn't know she possessed. If Thomas joins Hope for the future, she whispered, he will reshape everything. Not just the designs, not just the team, but me. And I'm not willing to lose myself again. Steffi's expression softened for a moment, but only barely. People evolve, Hope. You should try it. And with that, Steffi turned and walked away. But Hope remained frozen, her breath trembling, her heart racing, 1,000 emotions swirling within her like a storm refusing to break. By the end of the week, the tension had escalated into something that felt less like disagreement and more like open war. Meetings became battlegrounds. Emails became sharp, strategic maneuvers. Even casual hallway conversations were laden with subtext. And while both women tried to maintain professionalism on the surface, their quiet fury had become the centerpiece of the entire company. The upcoming decision, whether Thomas would rejoin Hope for the future, was no longer just a business move. It was a referendum on leadership, on identity, on strength. And neither Steffi nor Hope was willing to lose. The weeks leading from mid-December into the first days of the new year were supposed to be festive, a stretch of days filled with optimism, softness, and the glittering promise of new beginnings. Yet for the Logans, the Forrestas, and the small circle of people orbiting them, this particular holiday season felt less like a celebration and more like the slow tightening of a storm front moving in from every direction. The air crackled with ambition, anxiety, betrayal, and the subtle shifting of old alliances. Beneath the holiday lights, something dangerous flickered, something that would reshape careers, families, and understandings of loyalty that had existed for decades. Katie Logan, of all people, became the quiet epicenter of that seismic shift. Her voice had so often been the softer echo of Brooke's thunder, the reasonable counterbalance to Donna's brightness, the sister who followed rather than led. But that version of Katie evaporated the moment Bill Spencer placed a set of keys in her hand along with a deed to a fashion storefront he purchased solely for her. It wasn't a vanity project. It wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a declaration. You, Katie Logan, can build an empire of your own. For the first time in a long time, Katie felt the ground beneath her feet change. Something was awakening inside her, a hunger to be seen not as Brooke's sister or Will's mother, but as a visionary in her own right. Bill had promised her full autonomy. No oversight. No micromanagement. No pressure to build something that mirrored Spencer Publications or Forrester Creations. It was her brand, her direction, her voice. And as the plans for the store's launch unfolded during the week of December 15th to 19th, Katie discovered a version of herself she had almost forgotten existed. Bold, steady, unafraid. She walked through the empty storefront, imagining the runway lights, the mannequins, the rows of garments that would one day carry her name. To her, this wasn't just a business. It was liberation. But dreams, especially big ones, tend to disrupt existing structures. And the first to feel that disruption was Hope Logan. Hope had been struggling ever since Thomas Forrester resurfaced with the unnerving confidence of a man who believed fate owed him forgiveness. His presence alone fractured her sense of stability. She had spent years clawing her way out of the emotional labyrinth Thomas once created around her, yet here he was again, reformed, charismatic, enigmatic, and once again pulling her into the gravity of his intensity. He claimed he wanted to prove himself professionally, not romantically, yet his eyes lingered too long, his words dipped too often into emotional territory he promised he had abandoned. Hope could feel her career slipping from her grasp. And Steffi sensed it too. Steffi, who had fought tirelessly to cement her position as co-CEO, saw Hope's internal conflict as a threat to Forrester Creations' stability. She had no patience for artists who let personal turmoil blur the clarity of their vision. To her, Hope needed discipline, not excuses. And the minute Hope expressed interest in keeping Deke Sharp involved with new design suggestions, Steffi pounced. Steffi respected talent, but she respected control more. And Deke represented unpredictability at a time when Forrester Creations needed unity. Hope tried to defend Deke's ideas, but every argument she made betrayed the emotional turmoil she was trying so hard to hide. Her voice shook. Her eyes darted. Her focus drifted. Steffi saw it all and interpreted it not as vulnerability, but as weakness. All of this unfolded just as Katie's brand began gaining quiet buzz, and the irony was not lost on Hope. For once, she wasn't the Logan pulling attention away from the Forresters. Katie was. And the industry's early whispers carried a message that Hope found both thrilling and terrifying. Katie Logan might become a serious competitor, not just to Forrester, but to her own nieces and nephews. Meanwhile, Eric Forrester was watching all of this in silence. Ever since Ridge had orchestrated a premature retirement celebration behind his back, Eric's faith in his son had been deteriorating like a bruise spreading beneath the skin. He felt betrayed, belittled, handled like a fragile antique rather than respected as the architect of the very empire Ridge was trying to steer. While Ridge insisted it was out of love, Eric saw it for what it was: control. And he refused to be controlled. Not by age, not by fear, and certainly not by Ridge's misguided attempt to protect him from himself. So when Eric learned that Katie Logan was launching a brand with full creative independence, something stirred inside him that he thought had been extinguished. The fire to build. To lead. To create without limitation. To prove that his talent was not a relic of the past, but a force that could still redefine the future. He imagined the storefront filled with the energy of a new house, one not shackled by legacy or tradition, but revitalized by innovation. He imagined mentoring young designers, shaping new voices, crafting a final renaissance for himself that had nothing to do with family politics. Katie's brand represented exactly what Ridge had denied him: freedom. Donna was the first to see the shift in his expression. She recognized the glow in his eyes, the subtle straightening of his spine, the breath that seemed to fill his lungs with renewed purpose. She didn't question it. She didn't challenge it. She supported it with a soft but unwavering devotion that had always made her the anchor Eric didn't know he needed. But not everyone would be supportive. The moment this news reached Brooke, everything would fracture. The week of December 22nd to 26th brought a strange juxtaposition of festive decorations and emotional tension. There were holiday lights, beautifully decorated trees, glittering ornaments, and carefully wrapped gifts. But beneath the surface, the air felt charged with impending conflict. The Forrester Christmas gathering was strained in ways no one dared discuss openly. Ridge tried to maintain his authoritative presence, but even he could sense that his grip on both the company and the family was slipping. Steffi felt it too. She watched her father carefully, recognizing the fear beneath his stern facade. She knew he was worried, not just about Eric or Thomas or Hope, but about Katie. Katie's brand wasn't just another competitor. It was a Logan competitor, one that carried the potential to lure designers away from Forrester Creations. And Steffi could see a quiet loyalty war forming, one that might fracture the creative foundation of the entire company. Zend felt torn. He admired Thomas's skill, but he also knew he would always be living in Thomas's shadow if he stayed. And the rumors that Thomas was planning to assert dominance again, perhaps even pushing Hope into emotional territory she didn't want to revisit, made Zend uneasy. Deke Sharp, too, was restless. He had fought for place in fashion and believed he had finally found one, but Thomas's return threatened to erase him before he had even been given a chance to prove himself. Both men began taking secret meetings. And the name that appeared most frequently in those whisper conversations was Katie Logan. While Eric contemplated joining Katie, Brooke stumbled into a reality she never imagined. Her sister was positioning herself as a direct rival to Forrester Creations. And she hadn't told Brooke a single word. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't resentment. It was independence. And Brooke, who had always seen herself as the emotional nucleus of her sister's lives, felt the sting of exclusion sharper than she expected. Stunned and confused, Brooke struggled to understand why Katie had kept this from her. But the more she thought about it, the more the truth surfaced in uncomfortable ways. Katie had spent her entire life feeling overshadowed by Brooke's beauty, Brooke's romances, Brooke's scandals, Brooke's spotlight. This wasn't about competition. This was about self-definition. Katie was stepping into an identity separate from the legacy she was born into. Ridge, however, didn't see nuance. He saw betrayal. He saw his father preparing to leave. He saw designers being poached. He saw a rival brand rising at the worst possible moment, when Forrester Creations was vulnerable from internal conflict. And he responded with anger that simmered beneath a thin veneer of holiday civility. The final week of December into New Year's Eve brought a slow but powerful unraveling. Ridge confronted Eric, demanding clarity, demanding loyalty, demanding assurance that Eric wasn't abandoning the family. But Eric refused to explain himself. He didn't owe Ridge an explanation. He refused to allow his son to dictate his purpose ever again. Ridge's anger grew into desperation. And desperation became resentment. At the same time, Brooke confronted Katie, but her emotions were tangled: hurt, pride, curiosity, fear. Katie, however, stood firm. She explained her vision, her reasons, her independence. And Brooke, for all her protective instincts, secretly felt awe. Katie was stepping into her power in a way Brooke had never fully anticipated. Then came New Year's Eve, a night shimmering with sequins, champagne, and the illusion of hope. But beneath all the glitter was the tension of shifting allegiances. Katie made a quiet vow. She would succeed not out of competition, but out of conviction. The Forresters made a loud vow. They would protect their legacy at all costs. And Eric made the most dangerous vow of all. He would no longer live according to anyone's expectations, including Ridge's. But as fireworks burst across the sky, an entirely different threat lurked beneath the surface. Sheila Sharp. Her marriage was fracturing. Her grip on Deacon was slipping. Her jealousy toward Taylor Hayes was turning volatile. And in the new year, her instability would not simply complicate the fashion war, it would ignite an emotional explosion that would overshadow every business rivalry and every creative ambition. Because personal destruction has always outweighed professional warfare, and Sheila, more than anyone, understood how quickly the former could devour the latter. The next 3 weeks would redefine alliances not through business decisions, but through the tangled, dangerous intersections of love, betrayal, obsession, and the desperate need to be seen.